Caitlin, how are you?
Good, thanks. You?
I'm good, thank you. So I have some questions to ask you today about your academy experience. So my first question for you is, how do you feel you've transitioned from the 1010 Academy to your client work?
Surprisingly well. Like considering that I'd been working in retail beforehand, I was kind of worried about going into, I guess, like that office kind of scenario and a different world, as it would. And so I was like, well, I've learned all this stuff, but how am I actually going to apply it? I guess. But it worked really well. It was kind of like the Greek versus Romans, that thinking versus doing type thing. So I'd done all the theory and done all the thought about it, and now I could actually like get given tasks and stuff to do specifically, and then I could go forth and be like, "Oh, cool! I need you to explain this a bit more thoroughly to me, so that I can understand exactly what you want from me." And then it was just a matter of making sure that I did what I did well, and I think I've done that very well.
That's great, yeah, because there is such a difference between like learning stuff and then actually having to apply it. So I can imagine it being you feeling a bit apprehensive at first, being like, I know it, but like, how am I going to present it? But it's great that you've managed to, and also someone's been there clearly to help you when there's things you might not have been as straightforward on, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So my next question is if you can just take me through your placement. So what client teams have you worked with and what specific projects have you been responsible for during that placement?
So on my client, I'm really only sort of working with the one team. We're doing one project. I've been brought on specifically for it. Um, we're replacing like voice communications, and part of that has been making sure that the solutions we want to implement are possible. So we need a working circuit to make sure that we can actually put in one of the solutions that is the easiest and the best cost-wise. So we found that there's a lot of faults in the places that we want to implement this. It's part of my, well, basically my main task, I would call it, is that I monitor those and work with our supplier to make sure that they get fixed. And that way we can implement that solution. So kind of on like a daily type thing, I'll just check in on my faults and be like, okay, cool. Has there been an update today? Am I just waiting on it for an appointment? But in the background of that, we've kind of done various other bits. So I created an ADO backlog for the project, which was really fun. I think because it's project management and not so much like testing, which ADO was made for, I feel like I've butchered it a little bit, but it works for us, and that was the goal. So we're doing it agile. It was fun to learn. A little scary, like at first, because I'd heard so much about ADO, and I'm like, oh my god, how am I going to do this? But it's surprisingly easy to follow like all the Google guides, which was nice to see. And then in my downtime, when the faults have been like slow, which yay, we prefer that. We'd prefer there were no faults. I would ask around and be like, is there anything I can get involved in, because I like to go in the office. So I've ended up helping with a project where I've been checking the SLAs with our suppliers to like see if there's ways that we can improve that and where that we can improve communication with them. And then I managed to get involved in another project involving the repointing of some satellites. Mostly with that, I've been doing change requests, which was also something that was terrifying because everyone likes to call it a dark art, and I think it definitely is. It's hard to understand what people mean, and there's not exactly anyone that you can ask about it.
Amazing. That's really lots of busy work then. They've kept you doing lots of different things. That's really good because it means you're just constantly learning new things, delving into new bits.
Oh, yeah.
So what parts of the 1010 Academy training have been the most useful, would you say, in your placement?
Oh, it's really interesting because, like, I wouldn't say there's anything that's been more useful than anything else. Um, I've kind of, I think, applied it weird, in that's like, so when we did the testing documentation, um, which I had a cold at the time, so I found it really frustrating to do. But once I got like past the realizing it was sort of like a uni essay, once we got like to the criteria and the sort of, I guess, marking of it, it sort of slotted into my head a bit better. So when I came across actual like general documentation for the business that I'm on client with, it was a lot easier to understand. and kind of I guess work with. Like I'm now like whenever someone gives me some documentation for like a process or something, I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Because now I can read through it and actually understand it instead of just everyone being like, oh yeah, you just kind of go based on this vibe. But yeah, so that was really useful. And then weirdly Java, like learning Java was really helpful for me understanding Excel formulas, which makes no sense. You'd think it'd be databases, but no, I think the way that like the Java is sort of set out, um, in the way that it's kind of like in my mind, it's kind of like little Lego bricks, and the way it sort of builds up and tabs along. Um, but that helps me understand sort of the way that Excel formulas worked, and I could visualize it better in my mind.
Oh, that's amazing. It's a good way to think of it, though. So what's like a normal working day or week for you?
Um, so pretty much every day I go into the office unless like I've chosen to go home for the weekend because I am hybrid. I could work from home. I just prefer the office environment, and on client we get like two rather large monitors, so I would much prefer that than to be sat in my room. It's also nice to be able to like talk to people in the office, so I do that. Then there's usually I think immediately I check my email and my Teams, because there's always the potential that something can go wrong and you want to make sure that you're up to date on stuff in that sense. Um, but after that, I kind of just load up my faults, check that there's not been an update, or if I sort of do an update, I'll like talk to our supplier and be like, hey, could you give me any information that you have on this at the moment? And then it depends on whatever's currently kind of going on. So now that I'm working with that SLA, on that SLA spreadsheet, I check the daily updates for that, and input those, and everything else is kind of based on what's currently happening. So if there's like some change requests that need to be set up, then I'll do those, or I'll check them for approval if that's what stage they're in, or if they're all approved and everything's happy, I'll just be like, oh cool, yeah, I'll I'll work on something that's been pushed to the side for other priorities, and it's like constantly changing.
I guess that's good though, because it keeps you kind of very on top of things. You've got to know exactly what's going on because, like you said, things can go wrong and things can change
Oh
when you
yeah.
don't expect them to. But it's also good because it's different. If you're doing the same thing every day, it could get a bit frustrating and repetitive. So it's good that you touched on it earlier anyway, the loads of different projects and things that you've worked in. It's nice that every day kind of you know the gist of what you're doing, but things can just change, and that means could be a little bit of extra stress, but also means the day is entertaining and you're doing something
Yeah.
good. You're helping.
My favorite
So,
example was one time we accidentally got some rather large deliveries sent to the office here, and because I'm the only one of my team in the office, I had to collect them, sit with them, and be like, what am I doing with them? Oh, they need to go somewhere else. So then I had to drag them back down, and
well,
that
there
was
you
that was
go.
an interesting day.
A skill you didn't think you'd need, but you've got it now. So next time it happens, you're like, I've got this, guys. I've done it before, I'll do it again. So, like I said before, you've kind of touched on this anyway, but have your roles or responsibilities changed at all during your time on placement?
Um, yes, I think. So I think when I started, it was mainly sort of admin kind of work, and as I become more, I don't want to say like they trusted me, but when it's like you've proven that trust and showcasing that I am capable. In doing that, I've managed to get to the point where I can now process change requests and be responsible for those. I've learned to basically, I can process like sub 10K contracts and basically be a signer for those. I can't release the money, but I can prove that like yeah, this contract's been signed, whether they're going to do it, that kind of thing. I've also kind of ended up responsible for explaining ADO to my team a lot of the time, since they're not very familiar with it, and that was my task, and I sort of self-taught it. So now I get to explain to people in my awful ways that here's how I butchered ADO.
Well, you managed to do it, so it doesn't matter how it came about. You've got the skill to do it, and that's the most important thing. And it's also very good that you're able to take your knowledge that you know and pass it on to other people, because obviously at the start you were the person learning, you were the person that went through the academy, and you were joining the client, and it was I'm here to learn. But now the fact that you've got to the point where you're also instructing other people and teaching them new skills is shows how far you've progressed, which is so good for your career as well. It's just amazing. So what technology tools, frameworks, or processes have you gained experience with since starting your client work?
So a lot of them sort of just mainly like the Excel. I learned a bit about project. We tend to stick to Excel, which I have decided that I prefer because of the conditional formatting. I think that's I like using the colours. I'm going to be honest. So I got a lot of opportunity to work with that and understand that a lot better. Then there's ADO, which I never thought I would be doing as project management, but I'm actually really glad that I learned. It's very useful. Learning change requests as like a concept in general was like really, really useful because like I'd never really. I mean, I think you kind of know of them ish when like updates come and stuff like that, but I hadn't really understood how it works in the background at all. And now every time I hear about like recently in the news when Microsoft, or was it someone else, when that change to Microsoft occurred and everything went down for a bit, I'm like, how did that change request get passed? And that little judging that you always do. um, but yeah, like it's more understanding how businesses sort of work behind the scenes than it is a lot of different tools. But it's been really useful.
Yeah, I was going to say that's really cool. We get to see, you see things on the news all the time, but you actually understand how those things came about, which is so cool because that's not something that people know like on a daily, is it? So the fact that you could understand that process and what's gone wrong then again, like shows how far you've learned, because that is like so cool. Everyone else was like, God, this thing's gone wrong, everything's shut down, and you're like, I know exactly why. So that's very, very interesting actually. It's really cool that you know that. So how has your client supported your development? So this could be in training sessions or any sort of one-to-ones you've had or shadowing other members. What's that been like?
So I think it's been really, really good. The My client did like a learning week at some point. I think that was like I think it's like a thing that other places do as well. But it was just nice to see them, I guess, include themselves in that. I joined a couple of little lectures. There was one on budgeting, which I found sort of useful, and then of course I've done nothing with. um, they also offered like workshops, so they did agile and ADO workshops, which did help quite a bit. Then they've always made me like, well, I'm sorry. So my team have always made like a point to include me in all of their meetings, like right from the start, even if that wasn't necessarily going to be relevant to me or was something that I could contribute to. It was like, well, at least you'll have that background knowledge, and it has been really useful in seeing how I guess the interactions work. I've learned a lot from just observing about how to like I guess host your own meetings and that kind of like tell a little story, the background at the start, and then you move on to the actual meaty part of the meeting. Um, but yeah, my team I feel like provide a really, really safe environment for asking questions. There's like so many times that I've just been like, could you guys tell me what this acronym is, please? I've ended up creating my own glossary because there's just so many that you come across, and yeah, they've been really helpful with that. They always make a point to be like, do you have anything to say, Caitlin? And I'm like, no, I'm good, thank you.
That's really nice to hear. It's nice to know because obviously you said you were hybrid, and I know that you moved away pretty far. Was it Leeds to Scotland? So
Yeah.
it's a fairly big move to make. So also the idea that that's tough, and they're still looking out for you, because that's a big thing in itself aside from work. From a personal sense, that's a big step to make. So it's good that you feel kind of seen and heard there and looked after. And also, like you said, it might not have been things in meetings that you could necessarily help with, but you being aware of the company as a general and what's going on in general is so helpful. And will benefit you with your work because you're aware of other factors that might conflict with your work or anything like that. So that's really, really nice to hear that they are taking such good care of you. And it leads very nicely onto my next question, which is, what support have you received from 1010 during your placement?
I'd say like at least equal to. So they continue to support my learning. I can put in requests for courses and certifications, and I know that I can continue like elevating myself and what I know. And then there's like financial aids from 1010. I know they reimbursed my rail card recently, which I really appreciated because getting back from Perth to Leeds is it's pricey and it is a very lengthy journey. So I definitely needed that rail card. And it's I just know that like well-being as well is always just like a Google chat away, and they're all really responsive. And if I have questions, if I need anything, I know I can always ask, and you'll get me the best answer you can.
That's great. Yeah, it's the support that you guys get is really nice, and I think, I mean, obviously, I sit with the wellbeing team and I work with them, and you can just tell that the care that they have for you guys is so much deeper than just their job, if that makes sense. It's you know that you are like their main, not concern, what's the word, like the main priority, I guess, and that's always really nice to know. And I think the mix of, you've got your client work, but you also know that where this all started, you started with your training, you can always go back to somewhere that you probably will always be more comfortable with because it was where you started out, so you kind of know people more there. And it's nice that that is always still there for you to go to no matter what, on top of the extra support that you get up there anyway. So because you're working in project management, we have an extra question of what it's like working with project stakeholders so early in your career.
It's a very good question to ask. It kind of threw me off a little bit. So I feel like I need to mention that I've not really had experience with stakeholders like prior to this. I guess the closest would be when I did additional BA training, and it was the trainers like masquerading as them. But even that was like different to how they appeared in my mind. Like in my mind, it's very like the movies that you see, and it's that kind of corporate job of like, oh, my boss can't know that like things are going bad, or and it was that kind of like, you don't want to get yelled at by the higher up, and it's like, oh, they just need to know that everything's going well type media portrayal. And so for that reason, I guess I kind of saw stakeholders as like some kind of like big scary other type being, and it's been very different to learn that, at least in my case, they're not. They appear in meetings, and it's very much like you discuss the risks as much as you discuss how well the project is going. It's kind of just like you're working with them, and you realize that you're just giving them visibility of what you're doing so that they can make informed decisions about the business that is, you know, like above where you are, or like in a slightly different sector to you, I guess. They're all different department, not so much sector. But it's literally just a case of like I guess giving a report to almost like your line manager, just like, oh yeah, here's how this is working. Here's the kind of like decisions that I'd recommend, based on my knowledge. If you want more details, please ask me. But if you want to make a different decision, that's your choice. That's like on you. So I guess it sort of ends up feeling more like someone that you kind of don't want to say working with, but that kind of vibe, more than it is, please don't yell at me.
That's great. So I have one last question that I always like to throw in at the end, and it is, if there's anyone watching this that's joining the academy or considering joining and has just come across our page and wanted to look into some of these videos, what is something that you would say to them, and why?
Oh God. I guess go for it. Like you have nothing to lose from applying. I worked in B&M retail as like a supervisor before this, so it's, you know, it does give you that leap. As long as like you enjoy learning and you work at it, like everything. I don't want to say it definitely will turn out amazing, because I'm not one for like false promises, but you know, it's the same as anything else. If you work at it, and if like stars align.
That's great. Thank you so much for speaking to me today, Caitlin.
No worries.